Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I want to ramble on for a while about some of the updates that I made to the build collection, and we'll go over what got changed, and then we'll also go into why it got changed, either by spreadsheet or just by me explaining it. We'll go character by character for this video, and of course, as always, I'll be using my build collection, as this is very much about that. Everything will be linked down below, as I'll try to remember to make sure of that, all the builds that we'll go over. And everything will be time-stamped as well, so hope it is easy to jump around and see the parts that you're interested in. So yeah, let's get started, as this will likely be a very long one as well. And to give a brief introduction on the build collection, as some of you may know it, others might not. This is my build collection. We have a ton of builds in there, most of them numbered. What may not be instantly obvious is how and what those numbers in the front mean. Those are actually my first on this side of the dot. On the left side of it is the character number, and it goes up to 5, as I have 2 accounts that I show up here. 4 characters on the first account, 1 on the second account. And that is that, for instance, here we're starting with character 1 dot number is all of the loadouts in this character slots. As for instance, in a second, we'll be discussing 1.08, and of course, then the 08 on the second part, as it goes up to 16, should be obvious for most that have a lot of loadouts, is the limit of loadouts you can have on a character. So, for instance, here, all of the character 1 slots are up to 1.16, and then it goes up to, then it goes to character 2. Just to introduce that part. And yeah, let's jump into the first build. And to kick it off is the CombatMedic on character 1. And this one got a minor rework. Actually, most of the CombatMedics got a minor rework, although actually there was 2 of them in the collection, of course. A further one in glass, as we'll see, has basically gotten the same treatment. We've also added in a few strikers. Striker CombatMedics, will go into them as well. But this one was a minor upgrade I always wanted to do. I didn't do it for the longest of time. And that is putting in 2 pieces of Brazos, and of course, definitely a Picaros as one of those pieces, and removing a Grupo and a Fenris, as that was the way this build was when we also did the build showcase for it. This is a minor upgrade. We'll go into the numbers of it in a second. But what it allows us to do, of course, is to have a skill tier come from this brand bonus. We're getting weapon damage instead of a crit damage down here. It is giving us the same amount of skill tiers with 1 more core, but we're, of course, giving up brand bonuses for that. If we actually jump into the build picture for this one, as this is 1.08, and of course, everything will be linked down below, so you can go and look at them as you wish. Yeah, we have recouped basically 1 more red core. That can also actually be very useful, because now you can keep the red core, for instance, on, as I have here, a gift backpack. You could actually have a full red gift, and just instead of how I've laid it out, instead put the repair skill mod in here, for instance, and then have a chest as well that's fully red, and then a repair skill mod, making it a lot more easy to get those parts. Although, of course, it comes at the cost of getting a Picaros, which is decently easy, as they have a high drop rate. The other piece of Brazos is actually always kind of hard to get. They are craftable, of course, so you can go for that. That's kind of the way I went for it, but they cost a lot as in resources, and then they require usually a bunch of optimization, because yeah, you need to record them. They come with a blue core, of course, both of them. And yeah, damage wise, this one isn't the greatest, but it isn't terrible either. It is set up to be, combat first, medic second. We'll see later that this one actually heals the best, as the idea with this one was to keep as many repair skills as I kind of wanted. And it is actually a little bit too many, I would say, maybe for general use, but I have, of course, multiple variants. So this one is more pushed towards being actually a pretty competent healer. Let's jump into the numbers that actually underlie this choice. And this is the multi-calculator I kind of used to put the numbers as we see them there together and make the choices that I did. Basically, what we have here is the old version and then the new version, and then an old version with grade 20, and then an old version with, the new version with grade 20. And then we have it repeating with coyotes, as of course, this is a build that I would definitely run in groups. So I'm kind of expecting a coyote 15 to 25 from somebody else. That's also why it's set up at 52 crit chance, as I have it here in its main setup. And that's also why we're going into coyote numbers, because then it makes a little bit more sense. With headshot off, as we have it now, so I've put headshot completely at 0. It doesn't seem as much of an upgrade, because if we look at the first set of numbers, especially without coyotes in there still, we actually, the Picaro's variant does win out by a percentage point, and that is, a minor upgrade. That's also why I left them off for this long. Going to grade 20, of course, the grading goes into weapon damage, so that affects the Picaros more than the, for instance, if we had Grupo there. Then the difference is basically negligible. And especially if we go into that same grade 20, but then also the coyote being active, bringing up the crit chance to be much more relevant towards our crit damage, having a much better ratio there, then yeah, actually it is barely a difference. Although still in the favor, of course, of the of the Picaro variant. Although, of course, at this point it is basically a non-change because it's 0.03%. But once we actually, if we alter the headshot here, and this will alter it for all of the builds all at once, with headshots, of course, they feed into the same pool as crit damage. Now we're talking 4%, 3.1%, and even with the coyote on headshots, we're gaining 2.5%. Now, of course, this is implying basically 100% headshots. If we take this, for instance, to, let's put it at first 10% headshots, it is still a tiny amount of an increase, and 1% when grading isn't there. And yeah, these are pretty realistic numbers for this build. So it is a minor upgrade, one that I wanted to do for a while. And just took the time to do it finally. On this same spreadsheet, as we'll come back to it later, is also the glass numbers, but we'll come back to that on character 4. Let's hop on through to the next build. And the second and last one that got changed on this character, as we'll move through them pretty quickly, hopefully, is a chill out variant of PFE. I always wanted to use the chill out in some way for PFE. There is actually ways of making it make sense, especially with the Picaros, as I have it here. As we'll go into the numbers in a second, I'll clear that up, why I've picked a Picaros. And it is very much a standard PFE. It is with 12s, and then together with Survivalist taking us to 80. And it is a general layout. I've gone here with Vigilance Obliterate, but also both of the chest and backpack I have chosen here is free tauntable, and it is with 3 blue cores, and this is very much a setup that I like for rogue fights and a setup that I like for countdown especially. Let's jump into its build picture, and we are just keeping crit damages high, we're getting crit chances, we're putting crit damage next to the Picaro's weapon damage as well, as we can have enough crit chance still to actually reach pretty close to the crit cap. And I'm mostly as well expecting not to have actually a mid-range buff active quite often, as people kind of huddle around hunters quite often. And I find that actually usually in hunter fights and such, people, especially the initial fights in Countdown, people actually don't have a mid-range buff active. Everybody huddles up way too close. So I'm kind of set up in that way for that. Also, we are actually just taking all of the crit chances here. We're, of course, not even taking an Elmo or something that has even more crit chance available than this. We're not putting any extra crit chances or like mods being crit chances. Of course, we could lose a Cheska, but yeah, that's also not a valuable thing to do. So we're just set up like this, mostly for a short range buff from a Coyote from a neighbor, and of course as well to not run the build at all with coyotes alongside, because sometimes I'm fighting rogues alone. Let's jump into its numbers, although actually, well, yeah, I should say, yeah, we're hitting 80 protection from lead stills, of course. That's what the Chill Out can provide you, is that you can move one of the mods over to here. You are giving up that brand bonus, really, but then, yeah, you can have one of the bonus, either Fox, Contractors, or Picaros. And let's jump into the numbers where I go over why I went for the Picaros. And the reason I went actually in the end with Picaros is this calculation sheet that we threw together. Firstly, I was considering either putting in a coyote and keeping 3 improvised pieces, or going with the Chill Out and then taking one, either Fox or a Contractors or Picaros. Likely Fox, Picaros. That was really the choice between those two. Setup wise, the coyote, of course, does beat out the Chill Out by the tiniest of amounts. And while this is true, of course, when we're fighting, just although they're very close, it's under 0.5%. It's 0.32%. Especially when we're that close, we're also headshotting quite a bit. So here we have it with the headshot active, taking the layout I had in mind for coyote with 3 improvised pieces, and then Chill Out variants with either Fox or Picaros, again with headshot active. And especially on, well, without headshot active, it's not far enough behind. But once headshots, actually, we take headshots at full activeness, this number is high enough that I would pick it over the coyote variant I had in mind, of course, at first. Although, of course, the coyote variant would provide a coyote buff to allies and stuff as well. But I'm seeing this as, I'll take it from my allies, and I'll provide just being tanky and in their faces. And then, of course, if we have both the 0 to 15 active actually on the coyote, that one actually still wins out. So this one will return to as actually on a different build. I have chosen to go coyote, but that for this one I wanted to actually make use of the Chill Out at some point. And this is really the only use that the Chill Outs will ever really see, I feel, in you know, actual builds, because it's kind of bad, really, if you actually think about it. It will be beaten out by coyote here. I've taken it here as well, just to get that Picaros variant in. And yeah, the Picaros variant wins out against the Fox variant because we have a bunch of blue cores, and actually I have 3 blue cores here. If I had even more, it would win out by even more. And we get even a bonus of 10 skill haste, which is insignificant in this case, but we do get it. So yeah, let's move on to character 2 and go over some of their changes. And here for their first of 4 changes, as we'll go over, although 2 are very brief. This one is a new build, has come in the place of, I believe, the True Patriot Techtank, as we did the weird Techtank build showcase on them, and we said our goodbyes at the end of it. It is, of course, although still existing in the build collection as an X build. At the bottom of the build collection, there's a bunch of older builds that I no longer have, but still want to have the build picture of, and you can still view it there and get the stats from it if you're interested in them. This one, though, is a CombatMedic for use with Striker, and Striker, of course, is one of the better damage dealers that we have as a gear set. I was holding off putting too many Striker in the build collection, but I've kind of eased up on that, and I've started just putting Strikers into everything, because why not? And you will see that as well, as there is a bunch of main Strikers. Every character now basically has a red Striker, and we'll go over one of them later on. And this is a CombatMedic variant. And one of the things I've chosen to do here, as we've also gone with a bunch of yellow cord Striker pieces, is I've kept the chest red cord, and with Overwatch, I'm choosing to have here as a buff to my allies, especially, of course, this is very much a group build. But what I can choose to do as well is I can, of course, grab my Cheska Obliterate chest from a different build, any build that I have here on here. This one's coming from several builds, actually. And I can just put this in and up my damage by quite a bit, because we're going basically from 12 total weapon damage, getting it also in a very painful way of being in cover for 10 seconds, to 25 total weapon damage that is much more consistent, and we can just get it done with the capacitor. Let's jump into its build picture right away as well. And this one is very standard layout. It is actually pretty close to the TurDRO Hybrid for strikers as well. So you could actually, if you have it both on the same character, you can kind of overlap some pieces, because it is skill tiers and crit damage. And this one especially, I've laid it out to be more towards damage. We're only getting skill tiers towards our two skills. And this one then as well has the least healing of all of the combat medics that I have. But it is still enough. It is enough to heal up a few allies, keep them alive. And of course, we are 6 skill tier. We can get non-shenaniganery supercharges out just by deconstructing our hive at any time. And that is also very strong in a group setting, of course. I very much enjoyed this build, and also there's a second variant of this one with even more healing, because that's kind of the way that I set them up. Is I'll put one towards damage, I'll put one towards more healing. We'll see that later on character 5. This one does come with some calculations as well, as we'll have those be linked down below, and of course I'll line them up here a little bit better. We've compared it here to the old variant of the CombatMedic, so not the Picaro's versions, which are like 2% better than this, let's say. And against them at full stacks, as we are doing here, we're taking the numbers with having a Cheska chest, and then here in this case is Overwatch and Obliterate at the bottom here. And these are, of course, the combat medics, and also comparing against just full reds. So Glass Vigilance reds and Obliterate Vigilance reds, the way that I usually do. All of the percentages are still comparing to that Glass Vigilance red. So it is actually at full stacks, at both full stacks. So Obliterate, at least in the Obliterate variant. So that is important, not the Overwatch one. But in the Obliterate variant, it's getting actually up to numbers that come pretty close to a Obliterate or Obliterate high-end Vigilance. And not too dissimilar as well. It's not too far away from a Glass Vigilance red, which is, of course, quite high. So basically, when you mutate strikers to be towards a hybrid, they still perform as a somewhat close to an old Obliterate Vigilance red, although still a little bit behind it, of course. And of course, sustaining worse as well, because of that capacitor. We'll also in a little bit see the other number that is here, which is, as I alluded to, a repair variant of this. That's on character 5. We'll come back to this sheet then as well. But yeah, these are actually on full stacks, much better than the combat medics of old. But of course, they need to stack to 100, where, for instance, this Glass one is outputting the 60% from its very first shot. Yeah, let's jump into the next one. And next up is the Striker Backfire. This featured already in the good bad builds versus bad builds. And yeah, it's stuck around. I'll hang on to it. There are sometimes that it's useful to have some hazard protection available to you as a build and to try some stuff out. I don't really like the Backfire that much. I don't mind playing it from time to time. It might get an upgrade, of course, in next season, where we'll have D-Talk on it. But 10% more on this build won't make the difference, I feel. If we jump into its build picture, it is laid out still the same as it was when we saw it last. Although, of course, I have two variants at the ready. I have basically this mask and chest in my inventory. I like the Obliterate variant a little bit better, just because you can get more consistent numbers out of it. Although, of course, the peaks of the Striker chest variant are much higher. And this is the layout that I would use for Strikers as we went over it. And of course, as well as a lot of people are recommending doing two-piece Cavalier, just don't. This is just better. You'll get the same amount of stats kind of out of it and more, actually, as we saw in its numbers as well as we went over in that video. We'll still bring up the spreadsheet as it was still from that video as well. And we put it up actually against with what this light blue ones are, which is a version that I grabbed from somebody else's video where they did put two-piece Cavalier and actually didn't even go for full blade resist, which was a little bit silly to me. But we're basically getting the same numbers out, especially with the chest. That one that they showed was also with the chest. And we're doing it with 100% bleed resist and getting basically the same numbers out. And yeah, just choices made, depending on, of course, keeping brand bonuses and stuff is very important. And yeah, two-piece Cavalier basically gets beaten well, just putting in a Cheska and a Sokolov or a Cheska and a Grupo. Although not a Grupo, because you want to keep crit damage low because you're going to be filling it up with that backfire if you're doing it right. And this very much is a build that replaced an old high-end variant. So we used to have a high-end version of this. And again, Striker coming in and being the new big boy in, in damage. This one outdoes the old variant by quite a lot. So you are better off indeed with putting Strikers on it, but in doing so, keep in mind that yeah, brand bonuses matter, stats matter. Cavalier is not the choice here. Let's move on to the next one. And next up as well, as you may be seeing a pattern, is another Striker as well. Although this one is mostly to highlight that I've altered a few builds, and we won't go into most of them, but this one I felt would be the one to highlight it with, is altering the build to accept Oreos now as well. And the way I've done that is to have a lot more crit damage on the build itself. For instance, in the showcase that this build featured in, it had actually some crit chance rolls on Strikers. We've replaced all of those with crit damages. An Oreo comes in. And the thing is, quite often people ask me of like, okay, how do you make an Oreo version of this? And the thing is, that really doesn't make a difference. There is no like alteration that you, for a build like this, like if it had, for instance, a Fenris piece, I could see, you know, you would swap that to a Sokolov. But with a weapon like a weapon change like this, the only thing that is really changing is the crit chance ratios. And we basically re-ratio the build, and we'll go into its build picture here as well briefly. We'll re-ratio the build just to fit the new weapon. And in this case, we've done exactly that. It's laid out now to fit the Oreo much better. And of course, the Oreo does decent numbers, and yeah, as an option, you still always have an option of making the Elmo or a FAMAS variant of this, which used to be the old version. But yeah, I'm very much enjoying the PFE in Oreo variant because all it really got is way more damage. And yeah, that is, of course, not a bad thing. Let's move on to the last build of this character. And then we have this final one, which actually contradicts a point I made earlier, of course, about not putting two pieces of Cavalier in a build, except when you know what you're doing. So in this case, we are putting two pieces of Cavalier in this build. I actually showed this build as well during the good bad build and bad builds video. There it was still with three pieces of Eclipse, which is the old version of it. And that very much is the thing that has changed about this build. It used to be with three pieces of Eclipse. We're getting the same bonus of 30% hazard protection now from two pieces of Cavalier, meaning we got to put in one more piece. I was considering putting in a Chill Out, but upon reflection, I decided against that, as mostly as well, I already want to still keep my Point Man in here. If I didn't have this Point Man, a Chill Out might be a decent choice because it would still be our first piece of Gila. Here, it would have gone to the second bonus of 10 plus 10% health, and actually would have not basically that 10% health. Instead of that, we've taken one more armor regen roll by going this improvised. We still have the same amount of protection from elites, because of course the mass does already have one mod. And that's kind of the thing here, especially in a build where you're replacing a piece otherwise that wouldn't be able to take protection from elite like we had with the Picaros. You could make the chill out kind of make sense, but actually in here it would just be swapping this armor regen for a 10% health. That's what in effect would happen. I'd rather have this armor regen, even if it is tiny. It's adding into even more armor regen. And this is of course very much a raid tank. This one is set up to be very tanky, regen a little bit, and have protection from elites, and be as well, of course, 100% hazard immune against everything. If we briefly jump into its build picture, it is not that interesting. The only thing that has changed is just to highlight that Cavalier has replaced Eclipse in these kind of builds. And I would definitely say this is my preferred loadout for this. An alteration you could have is to have a replacement piece be in the form of Yal, and then go with the chill out. You could do that, but I would say this is much easier and kind of gets basically the same results, because this build as well is overkill, but it's also overkill because you kind of is one of those builds you have one job and you just don't want to end the raid with people going like, dude, you just had one job. You know, you just want to over tank, you want to be way too powerful and just over tank it, because if you go down, the rest of the raid will, you know, go down with you. So overkill in this case, or well, over not kill in this case actually, is very beneficial to the team. And yeah, just to highlight its change. Let's move on to character number 3. And we'll start off with a Striker, although actually there are many Striker that have been added to the build collection. I've replaced most of my glass reds on characters. I've retained one, really, on the main account of a classic glass red. And all of the others got turned into Strikers. And it was a kind of a sad moment. I always liked glass reds. I always also attempted to keep having way too many Striker builds out of the collection. The thing that made me relent is Incursion, and I wanted to have a build ready for each character to just jump into Incursion. And that pushed me towards that choice. 2 of them are with Elmos on character 1 and 2. 2 of them are with Oreos, as I do want to always keep not direct copies, so I don't want to have any per se direct copies of them. But what I do have actually on each character at this point is the ability, because I'll just keep Striker pieces around on them to, for instance, go from an version that was like that back to a version that looks a lot more recognizable. And even then as well, because most of my characters do have a Grupo and a Cheska chest, even to a version that is a little bit more, even more recognizable. And that is what, while I kind of feel bad about removing as many glasses as I had, I used to have on each character a glass and an obliterate, and both of those were on every character as well, as I did used to do a lot of raids, and I wanted to always have access to a glass and an obliterate, because usually I would grab glass, and then sometimes with weaker teams I would actually go to obliterate because I could be a little bit more tanky. But at this point every character on my account, on my main account, does have a Strikers on their slot 2, replacing all of their glasses, which highlights a little bit how effective these builds are, and how kind of sad I am that they're pushing a lot of other builds out. But yeah, let's actually move on to something else, which is completely different than, of course, a full red Strikers, which is an Techtank version of Strikers. Let's go have a look at it. And yeah, another Striker. But this one especially to highlight how, again, Oreo kind of worked its way into a lot of builds. This one is one of the most effective places it went into. I always liked the all of the Techtanks, of course. Well, not all of them. We have some weird ones. We had some less effective ones. But of the core ones, the Negotiator, the Striker, and the Heartbreaker Techtanks, I've never had issues with the Striker variant either. And the Oreo was just a straight up upgrade to it because it is very much a close range build. It can stack up really easily to 200 because you're effectively standing behind a very strong shield as is down there. And the Oreo just added firepower to it. And I very much enjoyed that, although, well, it's maybe a little bit too powerful, as this one can kind of push into some legendaries with a little bit too much ease, I would say. Although usually you do need to go charge up your memento a little bit. If we jump to its build picture, one of the things that I actually did wrong, and I just want to highlight that at first, as we're on the wrong build picture, jump on over, is that I went the same route of, I'll just put a Grupo piece in it, and it's fine. And actually altered the build picture pretty quickly, and then realized, of course, that I have 2 crit chances on gear before. We don't anymore. I went, of course, out and fixed my mistake. Although it was a mistake. Keeping in Grupo there, or just flipping this to a Grupo just to get under this, to get, to reasonable crit chance, crit damage ratios, was the wrong choice because, we had actually pieces where we could flip the crit chance over. And taking the time to go and get those and then put that back in a Cheska has improved the effectiveness of it by a percentage point, but I mean, why not, right? It is an upgrade, kind of like with the CombatMedics. It's a tiny upgrade, but one that, I did want to do. But as well, likely in the future, I'll actually make a build showcase on the Striker Techtank because it has become quite the beast, especially with the Oreo. Let's move on to the last one for this character. And next up is a build I alluded to earlier with having the Coyote in a PFE. And I found this to be more the place I wanted to have it, which is to have it with an Oreo, because the other one was very much set up to be with a high-end AR, FAMAS in that case, and a Scorpio, because a Scorpio is very, very strong. But here we're going for Oreo power, and again, with 3 blue cores, which is kind of the layout that I really like for Countdown. This one as well has been the place where I've moved all my 13 PFEs to. This character now carries it. And with all 13 PFEs, we're of course hitting a very high PFE already of 78, which is just 2 away from the cap. So we get to have instead of Survivalist, we get to have Firewall here, of course, as well. This is again as well a pretty short range build because of the Oreo, so it fits in really well. We get to also have the Striker Shield, and it's very powerful. And then one of the choices that I made here, and one that I'm not perfectly settled on, but I don't hate it, is because of the Oreo, we don't need much in the form of crit chance, because this build is already in its current form with 57 and 142, especially that crit chance at 57 is only the Oreo, the Cheska, and then the 1 roll on the Coyote that we can't change. And then all of these other 5 rolls, actually, if we go into the build picture, it'll be easier to see all of the other rolls except that 1 crit chance there. On the miners is all headshots. And of course, adding in headshot into crit damage is usually a bad choice because they're additive to each other. So especially in a lot of builds, you wouldn't choose to do this. But here it is still a damage boost where I could go for instance, hazard protection or armor regen, which I actually do have an armor regen PFE on a different character. So I didn't want to, hit that same style again. Here I'm going out for all out damage, all out murder, and of course all of the choices are kind of aligning towards that. That's also why I moved the 13 PFEs over here, just to go with the Striker Shield, just to go with that Firewall, giving buff to allies as well, of course, when I'm in proximity to things. And all of these headshots together, as we'll go into the numbers here, as this is the same spreadsheet actually that we did for the Chill Out mask, it's just a little bit below it, as of course both of them were PFEs. Yeah, numbers wise, all of those headshots, so we have 5 headshot rolls, are gaining us 20% headshot damage or damage when we headshot. So that is the return on investment thing, the diminishing returns that we see with bumping up stats that high. Because yeah, we're going from 70 headshot to 120 headshot, gaining those 5 headshot rolls, gaining 50 headshots. But even when we are headshotting, so this isn't even at a reduced rate, or we're not taking like 10% of headshot, but 100% headshot rate, we're gaining 20%. And of course, when we add in the 0 to 15 coyote as this second number, it's actually diminishing a little bit more because we're adding in another 25 crit damage into that same pool, of course. And yeah, this is a choice that it kind of works. If I get enough headshots out, we do have more damage than we would have without. One thing I want to highlight as well as this one is, of course, together with talent-wise, now we're going back to Adrenaline Rush Intimidate. Adrenaline Rush Intimidate does still work really well for PFEs. It doesn't work out for general play, really, and you're much better off with Bloodsucker or Memento to pair it with. But actually for PFEs, it is still a very strong choice because you don't lose that bonus armor that fast. And we've reached the end of character 3, and let's move on to character number 4. And yes, this is the Gen 3 variant of a high-end red. Well, of course, high-end reds don't see much use anymore, but this was one of the longest grinds I was on, as I got very unlucky with trying to get crit chance, crit damage, closer. And eventually, of course, as you can see here at the bottom, this one isn't looted. This one is crafted. As of course, it got added, likely by accident, to the loot pool of control points, and I finally got it. I'll take it just to be that the devs took pity on me and allowed me to have it. What this build is at its core is trying to get a better ratio for the Coyote, especially at a mid-range, with better stats for it, and leaving out Cheska. That's what makes the Gen 3 usually is if we're leaving out Cheska, which is a choice so bold that yeah, we went up a generation. And this variant does line up pretty well, and if Striker wasn't around, this would be a very effective build, but Strikers is around, and this is less than a very effective build. Likely for raids and such, this will still be pretty useful, as all of its damage is active kind of from the first shot, as its spotter, its vigilance, its flatline, everything kind of lining up as long as you're spotting your enemy and not getting hit in return. This will output its damage and can be very consistent, which can be a virtue. And of course, with Kingbreaker, it can actually put out decent numbers. But yeah, all of these high-end reds have been kind of outclassed nowadays by Strikers severely, I would say. Let's move on to the second one from this character. And that is this TurDRO, the high-end variant hybrid. It is very effective. It kind of gets outclassed again by some of its gear set variants, its gear set brethren, but this one still does have nice upfront damage. And especially if we jump into its build picture, the big change that happened here is kind of the same as with the CombatMedic, and actually the CombatMedic will show up again in a second, as that is the sister variant of this build. We've put in a Picaro and a second piece of Brazos, as putting in 2 Brazos, and that has upped the effectiveness of this build a little bit. It has gained on its old variant, and this is kind of the thing that Picaros can do, and especially 2-piece Brazos can do. If it's replacing either Grupos or Fenris, basically, it can be a gain. But if it's replacing, for instance, Cheska, it won't be a gain. If it's replacing a second piece of Providence, which, for instance, is here, it wouldn't be a gain. And yeah, this build has gained quite a bit in effectiveness. Also, it has gained the way of much more easily putting in the Coyote into here, because that's of course a very effective choice to make for getting a little bit more crit chance, crit damage as the exotic here. Well, of course, we could go Memento, but with this build, I very much enjoy having like upfront damage. I have different variants of, for instance, the Ongoing Directive one or the Negotiator one where I can put in a Memento. So this one I'm keeping as upfront damage, and Vigilance and Glass kind of make sense for that. Let's jump into its calculations as I'll swap scenes and bring that more into focus. We have here the old and the PKRO variant. And yeah, the new variant is basically gaining on it. Here we have it without headshots active. It is gaining by %. When we go, as we haven't actually separated out these numbers, these are still comparing to the initial ones, but we can see just from the numbers there, especially when headshots comes in, it is actually quite the gain. And even with grade 20, the PKRO variant is still ahead, and this is again without headshots, and then with headshots it would actually of course gain a little bit on top of it. As well, here we have at the end the Striker TurDro variant. Now, of course, the Striker TurDro variant actually has less skill damage than this build, so it is actually on its skills doing a little bit less, but on the weapon end it is basically doing a million more than the headshot variant of this. And of course, the Striker one, we're taking it without headshots. It is basically comparing towards these old ones. And yeah, that number, those two numbers, big difference. And this is kind of the reason why the Striker TurDro Hybrid is, to me, kind of a very effective one together with the Negotiator and the Ongoing Directive one. And the high-end one is kind of falling behind. It's also the reason why I've actually given up one of the high-end TurDrones that I used to have, and that's been taken to give up its slot, and we've put something else in there. I think we've moved around. We shuffled some stuff around, and it became the new place for, I believe, one of the Strikers, actually, for one of the characters. So yeah, high-ends just don't stack up against Strikers, although of course this one has its damage up front. It doesn't need to stack and stuff, but its number is just not big enough to make up for that. Let's move on to the sister build of this on the CombatMedic, and I'll show why that is the case. And that next one is this one, and I consider these two twins, the CombatMedic and the TurDro Hybrid on this character, as they share a few pieces, and the weapon, of course, they're basically swapping in layout a little bit. They are using different sacrifice and a different gift backpack, as I'm using here. And of course, a Cheska piece is moving around, but just for the Coyote in the other one, and in this one, it is, of course, the BTSU. But these two kind of overlap quite well, and of course, in intent, they're kind of the same. They're hybrids towards keeping damage and doing something else. The other one is doing that something else as TurDro. This one is doing it as healing. This is the glass version of this build, of the build we saw basically earlier. I've given up a bunch of damage or repair on this one for 4 damage, and we're keeping all the crit chances that were on mods with the other build. We're moving them onto the build itself, basically getting a little bit more damage out, a little less repair. It's glass, so it's already, of course, doing its damage from the first shot. If we move to its build picture, it is the same layout really as the one we saw earlier, the CombatMedic with Obliterate, and then just giving up a few of those repair skill rolls as I'm aligning this one towards damage. And we see that return as well, both on the damage numbers, if you were to go back and compare them, or of course, open up the build picture and compare them, is quite a bit higher, especially glass as well, is very effective because it is doing that damage from the first shot. And we're losing a little bit on our healing, but still this build has very efficient healing and has more than enough, especially on the chem, to one-tap heal up a red build and even keep them a little bit healed afterwards. and we're keeping that supercharge. I very much like these builds, but the Striker version we saw might be overtaking these ones in how much I like them. If we jump into the calculation sheet, this is the same calculation sheet as we saw actually a few minutes before for the Obliterate. But if we scroll down, we have basically the same layout here for the Glass variant. And we see the same results, especially when headshot, for instance, here is inactive. Actually, we see bigger results, as this one has even more crit damage, of course, because it has less repair skills rolls on it. So that crit damage is already more diminished. So here we're already seeing that even on grade 20 here at the end, in the worst case scenario for the two-piece Brazos variant, it's still a percentage point ahead. And of course, when we bump up the headshot all the way to full, to be 90, we're gaining 3% even on that end one. And especially here with the Coyote being from somebody else with these last two sets of numbers here. Yeah, the Picaros is really pulling ahead. And that's kind of the range I would expect this to be on, because this is very much a group support build, so I'm expecting to be in a group. Likely there will be a Coyote active and likely even multiples, and this is the numbers I would expect. And yeah, this is the reason that this upgrade got made, because it is in effect a lot better. And 3% is worth doing the upgrade. If we take this headshot, do a more reasonable 10% and put that to 10% of the 90, we're still more than a percentage point ahead. Even with grading, we're still a percentage point ahead. So it is a minor upgrade, but one that I was wanting to do for a long while, and we finally put it in. Let's move on to the last one on this character. And for the last one on this character, I just wanted to highlight tip of the spear. And while I very much enjoy the word tips, as you may have noticed on my channel, tips in the game is, yeah, it is no longer really viable. This backpack talent is very strong, as we found out by back calculating that it is an amp, it is 50% amp, but for 15 seconds. And of course, it's very conditional to this fully depleting the signature ammo. While you can flump out your grenades pretty quickly, it's still, yeah, it's not worth it. And especially if we go into the numbers in a second, it will become crystal clear why it isn't worth it. This is the layout I settled on at the end, just trying to make it work as a kind of a red build. It kind of works. It's sometimes satisfying to clear out a wave with a grenade launcher, but also I could do the same basically with an explosive build, of course. If we jump into its build picture, layout-wise, it's nothing exceptional. It's just crit damages and crit chances as needed to reach a decent crit chance, crit damage ratio. We're going with the Elmo here as well. We could go Oreo, of course, nowadays and try to get more damage out of it. But especially once we jump into the numbers for it, as we have prepared here a sheet, this is the initial one as well that we used to test the numbers out, and this is the reason these are green. These are the ones that matched up, so TOTS backpack is an amp. Was our conclusion there. What we have here as well is the damage number for this build, and it is, when it is going, it is a pretty decent 9 million without headshots in there. But especially, for instance, if you were to compare that to even Strikers, yeah, it just falls quite behind. And this 9 million is so conditional and is so short to those 15 seconds that kind of kills it. As that is a respectable number for a build to hit, especially without headshots, but for just 15 seconds after, you know, unloading as well for several seconds unbuffed as well. Yeah, that kind of makes this unreasonable, especially when the amp falls away. Of course, we're losing a 50% amp and we're going to 6.1 million. And that's unbreakable high-end reds territory. Like, that's that level of not having damage. And this is, of course, doing it with an obliterate chest. Let's move on to account number 2, where we'll continue on with even more builds. And here we are with character 1 on account number 2. This is what on the build collection is the 5th character, as quite a few people did not understand how that works, as we have 4 character slots. Well, you have 4 character slots on an account, so I just moved it further and got a second account. And we'll start off here with this build, which is commonly known as the bro build. I'm calling it the TurBRO, as I usually call hybrids TurDro, so it fits quite well. I've made it as intended, as shown on many a place. The thing with it is I actually initially made it with more crit chance, crit damage, and it ended up as a worse variant than the high ends and especially the gear set variants that I very much enjoy. Pushing it back to being the skill damage, having skill damage on 4 of the pieces, did actually help to give itself a little bit of its own niche, as it is closer to a full turret drone. Not as close on damage, especially with its weapon, as TurDro Hybrid, the high end, or the Striker one, or the Negotiator ones. And of course, it's also reliant on Memento, which is very different from most of the other builds that I run as TurDro Hybrids. I usually avoid going for Memento just because, yeah, it is a glass build, you might die. But this kind of, works quite well. Jumping into its build picture, it is set up kind of how the recommended variant of it is, and it lines up decently well. Its turret and drone damage is pretty good, especially of course you're using the capacitor. But yeah, its weapon damage is a lot less, of course, than any of the other variants that I quite enjoy. And I find myself actually, I would go with some of the gear set ones, especially. One of the things holding it back is mostly the gear sets. It will, of course, get a buff, likely with next season, with another bit of skill damage from two-piecing Empress, but that likely won't save it either. It is an okay build to have, somewhat functional for sometimes when you just need, for instance, to get skill kills for some challenges in Summit or for some global events. It is perfectly adequate for that kind of things, but not my favorite. Let's move on to the next one. And this is a build that we kind of saw earlier as well, although a little bit different. It has a few more yellows. Also here it's also showing, of course, with 5 pieces of strikers, which is 25% better than 4 pieces of strikers. Except this is one of those, again, it is saved, the build is saved like this, and I was going to say I never run it like this, but actually, well, I don't intend to run it like this. I quite often make the mistake of running it in 5 pieces and going then, oh, oops, I forgot. But yeah, a Cheska piece will come in either as a chest with Obliterate, or I also have a mask that comes in if I want to keep it as a chest striker, giving me the option to either be with Obliterate or to have the chest of Striker. Let's jump over to its build picture quickly. And there we see that it is actually very similar to the other CombatMedic with strikers that we saw. I kind of wanted to make it a little bit different just to not have a direct copy. I quite like the other one as well, which was with crit damages everywhere instead of all these repair skills. This one then, though, can actually heal pretty well, and that's its upside. And of course, it gives it up in damage. And how much it gives up in damage, we can kind of see in this same calculation sheet that we had before. I kind of added this one on top. We had already the Overwatch and Obliterate variant of the other one, which had a lot more crit damage, because crit chance and crit damage, because of course it was not spending them as repair skills. This one kind of lines up with all of these repair skills with the Overwatch variant, kind of in the same ballpark. Of course, all of these need to stack, as we have also the old CombatMedics, the high-end ones still up here, and we're comparing mostly still, of course, against those high-end reds, in the Glass Vigilance reds being the one providing the percentages. And Yeah, it is. This one is somewhat decently behind the other one, especially in Obli variant. It's kind of 10% difference towards that glass red. Is it kind of worth it? I think having the middle ground might be the best version, but I kind of like both versions, so I will keep them as they are. But likely will in the future give this build its own build showcase because I do quite enjoy it to that extent. So that's also why I'm showing it multiple times here. Let's move on to the next build. And this will be our last one on this character before a very special guest. But before we discuss that build, let's discuss this one. And this one is putting into Habsburg pieces into a hotshot instead of having a chain killer and an Araldi piece. What you in effect get is that, of course, the Araldi would provide 10 specific weapon damage. The chain killer would provide 5 all weapon damage. That would line up to be the same bonus as the second piece Habsburg with this 15% marksman rifle damage. That's the exact same pool, of course. And that means that you're basically getting this 15 headshot for free on top. Although for free is maybe the wrong thing to say here, because the downside of this build is that it comes with blue cores, or well, the 2 Habsburg pieces come with blue cores, meaning that they are unicorns, because you're going after chest and backpack pieces where you're trying to get both the talent and the 2 stats, because you definitely want to keep the headshot on it. For me personally, the weapon handling was also somewhat required, although this build can do with having 1 weapon handling less, you can still make it work. I'd rather, at that point, I would just pick an Araldi and a chain killer. So going out of your way to have weapon handling headshot vigilance and weapon handling headshot headhunter, as I have here, came at a heavy cost. And I'll tell you here that it was around 18k worth of watch points in buying Habsburg pieces from vendors, getting resources, getting the credits for that, and then deconstructing them and then crafting these, because the blueprints are available, of course, if you were around for those seasons. And actually, even if you weren't for the seasons, they are dropping from control points nowadays. Yeah, this is a heavy cost, and it is better, and especially if we jump into its build picture, it is, if you actually would compare this with the Araldi variant, which I actually have on my main account, and this one again is also different than my main account one, and that's kind of the thing that I would like as well, to like have different variants. So I did go out of my way to make these. Damage numbers wise, it lands up higher, both on its cap and on its first shot. But that cost is so immensely high, really, unless you get insanely lucky and get it in a tiny amount, that while better, it is not worth it to me. You're much better off doing dozens of other things before you go all in on this, unless this is like the main build you're playing. And of course, Determined Headhunter or a hotshot headhunter is very popular, especially with Determined, because Determined makes it one of the best farming builds together with it. Yeah, it is one. I'm happy I went and got it. I wasn't happy for the hours and hours sitting there crafting and buying from vendors, as even if you have the watch points to spend, if you're like 30k, 40k, and you can kind of do it with one watch alt, you're still, the time investment is there, as I even macroed it and it was hours upon hours. And yeah, I personally think it's, while better, that it isn't really worth it. Unless, of course, this is one of your primary builds and you'll know when to spend this. For general people, this isn't worth it. For the people that already will go for this, I'm not going to convince them otherwise anyway. So let's move on to one last one, and we'll end it off there afterwards. And there is one final one. This one was always a joke one that I intended to make, as of course on the build collection, as we'll bring that up here. This is a character, of course, 5. If we then move on to their loadout slots, they of course have a loadout slot at 11, and that of course has always led to, what do we put in loadout slot 511? Up until now, it was just a high, or well, it was a glass red quite recently. As I moved the glass red into there, I think the Strikers of theirs was in there before that. But yeah, just for some shits and some giggles, I went and put some 511 into slot 511. Because, yo dog, you need some 511 up in your 511. And yeah, this very much is a joke build. This is somewhat equivalent of purple builds. It kind of, yeah, will likely do around the same amount. I haven't actually played around much with it. We put it together right before this video, and it isn't also the way I would love to have it, which is to have it with Obliterate Vigilance, Glass Vigilance, Focus Vigilance, Vigilance there, and then something better than Overwatch here. But we for now have Composure Vigilance. And actually, if we go to its build picture, you will actually see why that is, that we're going for some, less than stellar talents there, as I'm trying to keep the crit chance, crit damages everywhere. That was much more of a concern for me, as we're going all in on the crit chance and the crit damages. And damage wise, I already know it's landing on higher crit chance, crit damages than a purple build. It's getting a weapon that has a higher base than a purple build, so this will perform better than a purple build, even with a purple build that has Vigilance, Obliterate. Meaning that I'm pretty confident taking this through most content, really, because I've taken purple builds through them. And of course, there's a lot of small little Easter eggs on it with some expertising there. And of course, weapon-wise, I went like, what do we pair it with? And a build like this, you will only run it, of course, if you're born great. So... there was no contest there. And of course, while you're running it, you'll have good times. So yeah, we put those two there. Although both decently effective. Damage numbers wise, it doesn't line up well, but it is a silly little build for a silly little slot at 511. And it's 511s all the way down. I will actually likely run this for a little bit and try to see if I can make it work decently solo. I'll keep grinding and see if we get a better chest and backpack talent that is still on the menu. Although only backpacks are craftable, so chest will take a while likely, as I'll likely invest some resources into the backpack and get a better talent at some point. But for now, this is the best we got so far, and you sometimes have to show the best that you have instead of the ones that you want. And yeah, I thought this would be a silly little one to end this build collection update with. So let's head into the conclusion. And yeah, that concludes this build collection update video. I wanted to, in this one, especially give the reasoning for why some of the changes got made. And I hope I did that adequately. Going into some of the numbers, as that's quite often things that happen on stream, but I don't really, of course, discuss outside in videos and stuff. And yeah, just to show those numbers off and go over why I made those changes. As yeah, quite often changes just happen to the build collection. I don't really set out to make them quite often, and then you just go, hey, what if I do this, 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 and this? And suddenly it becomes a new build picture. And that's kind of how it usually goes, as it's an always ever evolving thing, I feel. And yeah, that leads us to this end. But of course, upcoming will be a little video that for the end of the year as a little celebration, as well as my channel has quite grown, of course, this year. And I will also try to squeeze in another build showcase before the end of the year. I haven't exactly decided what yet, but we'll pick something and just go for it. And I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me in the next one, or over on Twitch, where I'm streaming quite often. And actually, this entire collection was recorded live on stream. And yeah, as always, have a good night.